All right, well, there's been a lot of chatter about metrics and numbers coming out this week, folks, and I figured this was the perfect time to bring a previous guest back. He's a person in charge of the DSR. He created the DSR. That is a metric you're going to get used to. Of course, you go to d1softball.com. You can check out the DSR rankings every day. It's a unique metric that the committee this year in softball will use as well as in baseball for all you baseball fans as well. They'll be using the DSR metric. And the person that knows it inside out is our very own Forrest Allen, the creator of DSR, joining us here on Inner Circle on D1 Softball, powered by 643. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me back. I'm excited that people are starting to pay attention to metrics now. It's that time of year, so it's good to be on with you, man.
Yeah, and we're going to use you a lot here as we get closer to Mayhem in May, which we'll explain at the end of the interview. But I want to start. We had you on a couple of years ago to explain this. This was at the beginning. I'm curious. Let's start with the simple stuff. For those that are tuning in for the first time and they're hearing DSR for the first time, explain what DSR is and how it works.
Sure. DSR stands for Diamond Sports Ranking. So and the reason we call it that is because this is a metric that was built exclusively for diamond sports, right? RPI was initially built for basketball back, when we were in diapers, or probably a lot of before your listeners were even born, 1981, right? KPI services, probably a dozen or 2 dozen different sports. And I think that's a tribute to Kevin and what he's built there. But Diamond Sports Rankings is exclusive. It's just for baseball and softball. We don't do anything else. And so, um, excuse me, the genesis of this was, we thought, at 643 charts, where I work, we've got play-by-play data going back, about 7 years. And we were talking about the ranking system and how it was, quite frankly, bordering on criminal, that the fact that, football has, 8 and basketball has 10 or whatever the number is. And we're still stuck with a metric that was built 40 years ago for a different sport. So we took it on ourselves to try to do better. And so the way it works is it's an ELO based system. And what ELO is it's a point exchange system. They use it in soccer. They use it in chess. Scrabble uses, and so the idea is that when two teams play each other, the winning team takes points away from the losing team. And the magnitude of that point exchange is based on a handful of factors. One is, how good is the team you beat? Were you supposed to win, or is it an upset? Were you home or away? And then what was the margin of victory associated with that? And so all those factors go in, and so the winners take points from the losers, and then ultimately you take those points and you contextualize it within the strength of schedule that they've played and the conference that they play in, and it gives you a value of what's your probability of beating an average team. And so that's what's sorted and gives you the ranks.
It is worth noting. I bring this up every year, and I even bring this up with the committee chair people that I've had on since 2021. It is bizarre that the RPI is the main metric they have used when college basketball, for example, has dumped it in favor of the
Yeah.
net. And I'm not the biggest fan of the net, but I think that speaks volumes. So I'm excited to hear, and this is some big news, that the committee this year will use the DSR, has the option to use the DSR as a metric. Kind of expand on that development.
Yeah, it was, we wanted to do this collaboratively, and try to get feedback from different folks on that. And so what we did was we reached out to the NCAA and, specifically the baseball and the softball selection committees and said, hey, we've got something that we think can help you, because you guys on the committee have one of the hardest jobs, and it is a thankless job. And we're asking you guys right now to work with, one, if not both hands tied behind your back with, a couple of metrics. And so they were nice enough to hear us out. We met with them several times, and ultimately they came to the conclusion that's like, hey, we think this thing adds value. And a couple of the points that we tried to emphasize that I think resonated with the committee is, before DSR there were two, right? You had KPI and you had RPI. What if RPI says that a team is 10 and KPI says a team is 50, right? What do you go with? By adding a third metric like, DSR, if DSR says 12, well, okay, now I know that KPI is the outlier and they're probably somewhere in that 10 to 12 range. So having like a tiebreaker metric, even if it's not DSR, even if it's something else, right? Just having an odd number of metrics can help you sort of identify what's the outlier system here. So that was one thing. The second thing is that DSR complements KPI and RPI because DSR is a predictive metric. And what I mean by that is DSR looks and says, if you played an average team, what is the probability that you would beat that average team? And so it's informed by what you've done in the past, but it is not an evaluation of what you've done in the past, right? And Kevin and RPI both will tell you that they are looking at the quality of your resume and what you have done. And I think that's a valid approach. But what we try to do is do something different and say, look ahead. It's like, okay, given what you've done in the past, what could we expect you to do in the future? And so I think both of those things really resonated with the committee to give them another tool to help with a really hard job.
As you were making this, and I remember we had you on about 2 years ago, and I encourage people to check out our archives. It was a very extensive interview there as you were building it. That was your first year. And I remember towards the end there, you told me you were going to tweak some things. And you're always going to, that's the other thing that I like about you is you're willing to tweak some things if you notice some aberration. What have you learned through the last couple of years that you've had to tweak where now you feel like obviously you're from both sports, you can pick each sport, but that to the point now where you're trying to get it close to exact how you want it?
Yeah, so the big difference, there is a difference between baseball and softball. And one of the big decisions that we had to make was do you account for the starting pitcher? In baseball, there's a paradigm that's pretty much always followed of your best pitcher pitches on Friday, then it's your second guy, and then it's your Sunday guy. And midweek games are, more for developing, younger guys, giving them some experience and whatnot. And so the question was, if you win and so the way that baseball works is that if you win on Friday, it's worth more than a win on Tuesday. And so the question was so we apply that same logic to softball? Ultimately, we decided not to. And here's why. And you can take issue with it. I've heard good arguments on both sides. But ultimately, when you look at the number of innings that softball pitchers throw, it's a lot, right? Like a baseball's team best pitcher may throw 15 to 20% of their innings. But you referenced we did this, a few years ago. At that point, Maddie Pinta from Auburn, she was the SEC Pitcher of the Year. And so I compared her with Paul Skeens, right? Because they were both the SEC Pitcher of the Year. Maddie Pinta pitched 2/3 of Auburn's innings that year. And so what we couldn't, and Paul Skeens pitched about 18% of LSU's innings that year. And so we said, listen, with aces pitching that high a percentage of games, you're not going to make a Friday win more valuable than any other day of the week. So that was one tweak we learned that we thought about and researched. Excuse me. The second one was run value. So we use margin to victory as a criteria in awarding points. And so ultimately, what we had it capped at 10. And, as we've sort of vetted this through with different coaches and the D1 softball staff, they thought maybe that 10 was a little bit too high. So we ended up taking it down. So now the margin of victory is capped at 8. So if you win by 8 or 80, you get the same number of DSR points. It doesn't change because what we want to avoid is having people go schedule teams who are, inferior opponents so that they can run up the score. That's not good for anybody. So those were the two big tweaks that we've made over the course of the past few years.
What's the most common question you get asked, whether it be when, the NCAA, it could be just people in general in the sport? What's the most common question you get?
Did you even watch this game? It's probably the one we hear most. And the answer for me is always no. Because I think what we try to do is that there are lots of people, like you guys at D1 softball who watch a ton of softball. and we don't want to be an echo chamber for that, and we don't want to bias. We don't want to be biased by what we see. We just want to let the statistics speak for themselves so that we can offer a different perspective. But I think that's I say it tongue in cheek, but we do get that question. But I think the other one that we get more often is, can does this system, can mid majors be successful under this system, right? Because and can teams that play in the North be successful
That's a
in
great
this
that's a
system?
great question, because that is a common question that I hear. Mid majors
Hmm.
believe RPIs favor the power conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
that's actually a very valid, legitimate question there.
Yeah, and I really liked I like that people are thinking about that. And so what we feel like, because we prioritize, DSR prioritizes winning above all else, right? Because you only gain points when you win. And again, the magnitude of that points is based on the other things we talked about. But we feel like this gives mid majors a fair shot to win, because again, if a mid major goes and beats a power school, they're going to get a lot of points for that, because again, they may not probably aren't favored in that game. They maybe aren't as high up in the rankings, so they'll be able to take more points from that team. So we feel like this gives mid majors a fair shake. And then for a lot of those northern schools who have to play a lot of road games, road wins are worth more than a home win. And so we try to, and the bonus, if you will, for winning on the road, we try to ground in data. We didn't just pick an arbitrary, it's worth a win, 1.5 or whatever. So home teams win about 60% of the time. So road teams win about 40% of the time. So that's the bonus that you get when you do that. So we do feel like it gives mid majors a really good shot.
So let's kind of, and that point you mentioned the road. I like that, because obviously you're encouraging teams to not just play home games, etc. How about neutral fields? Softball plays a lot of tournaments in neutral fields. Baseball has
Mhm.
started to copy that, by the way, as well, with playing some neutral fields themselves. How do you value a neutral field game?
Yeah, so essentially what we do is, because again, a road wins 60%. Road teams win about I'm sorry, home teams win about 60% of their games. Road teams win about 50. So the bonus is about 10%. So we just half it, and we just say it's 1.5. We also toyed with the idea of, if you're batting last in a neutral site, is that an advantage? And we ultimately decided, no, we're just going to keep it simple, and we'll take exactly half of the value of a road win versus a home win. So we just chop it in half.
Now, one of the cool things you do there at DSR, you can value, see who had the best wins, who has maybe the worst loss. Give us an
Mhm.
example of this weekend, this past week, for example. Who had the best win that people might, who had a bad loss that really sunk them in the rankings?
Yeah, so I think as far as again, the way DSR works is it evaluates each game, and so there's a point exchange. And so when I look at this weekend, the most impressive win, from a points exchange standpoint, was Arkansas's 6-0 shutout win over Georgia. That resulted in the biggest point exchange of the weekend. Interestingly enough, Georgia's win on Friday was the second biggest point exchange of the weekend, right? When they won 7-2 over Arkansas. Texas State had a really impressive win over A&M, which got them 7.5 points. So um, and that has really and so we view it as one game. But in terms of like who improved the most over the last week, there were several teams that jumped at least 10 spots in the rankings. And that was a total of 6 teams actually made that jump. Um, and again, so I should caveat that this is within the top 100. And so that was led by Central Arkansas. They went from 97 to 70. NC State made a big move this weekend, jumping 17 spots. Again, to talk up to the mid-major component of this, North Florida went from 62 to 45, and East Carolina went from 79 to 69. And so what we like about DSR is that it's not overreactive and, and elevate and putting too much weight on a specific game, but it also does allow, when you have a good week, you can really move. Again, a team like North Florida being at 45 overall, I feel like that puts them at least in the discussion, for a postseason bid.
That was going to be my next question for those that are not familiar. What is a number, DSR number? Because there's always been conversations, and for example, in the RPI, people always talk about you want to be no worse than in the 40s to get to the tournament. Almost never does a team in the 50s get in as an at-large. Obviously, automatic bid is different than an at-large. Now, the net in basketball is very different. It's all over the place, which is kind of fascinating for people that follow that. Is there a number, have you noticed as you studied this the last couple of years, is there a number where if you're a team, hey, you want to make sure you have this particular number in the DSR if you want to make it as an at-large?
It's probably the same. The short answer is no. We haven't really looked at it. But again, DSR hasn't really been used as part of the selection, as an official selection criteria. And I shouldn't say it's not an official, it's just something that'll be in the room this time. But I think, because again, the field is limited, right? And so again, with the at-larges, again, I think, probably around the same, 40s is the number that you really want to have, for an at-large bid.
All right, I want to use a couple examples here. The metrics are out now. Obviously, KPI, RPI, DSR. DSR's been out for a while. KPI and RPI just came out this week, which is kind of interesting. Hey, but we're not going to. I also want to point out we've had Kevin Pog on the show in the past. I like him, so this is not a hey, one metric is great and the other one stinks or whatever. It's just interesting. I like having different metrics to compare. But I do think one thing I've noticed here, and again, it might come down to the tweaks that you did. I don't feel, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, Forrest. I don't feel like I disagree with as much this year, like versus 2 years ago. Remember 2 years ago, I was drilling you with a million questions. Why is this, Frank? I don't have as many because I kind of think it's pretty close. I mean, there's always, there's no such thing as perfection, I guess, but
No.
but we could shoot. I know we all shoot for that. But for example, I will bring up one here, McNeese. That is one that certainly has caught some people's eyes with their RPI and KPI numbers. With the RPI, to me, to being too high at 15, that's hosting purposes. You have him at 38. Discuss McNeese because to me that's one has gotten a lot of people's attention already.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up because I think one of the things that one of the big differences for DSR and RPI is the strength of schedule component and again your opponents, right? There's a lot of intricacies associated with with RPI, but at a very high level, it's a third your record, a third your opponent's record, and a third your opponent's record, right? So when I add that up, I say that's 2 parts other teams, 1 part my team, right? DSR considers strength of schedule, but we don't really emphasize it the way that others do. We put much more emphasis on winning and the quality of those wins, right? And I think McNeese has played a very strong schedule, right? I mean, we have their strength of schedule as 45th in the country, and they've done well with that schedule at 19-7. But again, what we're looking at is the wins there. With 7 losses, that has them closer to 38 over a 15. The other thing that we look at too is something we call Pythagorean. It's not my word, Pythagorean record. And the idea of, and some of your more advanced stats listeners will probably know this, but for those who are new to it, Pythagorean record is a way that you look at a team's run differential, right? How many runs have you scored minus how many runs have you allowed? And what it does is it converts that into a winning percentage. And so what some people say that is what your winning percentage should be. right, based off of that. So for McNeese, and so again, so if you're playing a lot of one-run games, your record should be around 500, right? Because again, your runs scored and your runs allowed will be roughly the same. But if you're outscoring lots of opponents, you should have a much higher winning percentage. Something that jumps out to me about McNeese is that they've won 73% of their games, which is great. But based on their run differential, they should be closer to maybe having won about 61% of their games, which is close. And to give you a context of where 61% in ranks in the course as a Pythagorean record, that's closer to 89 rather than 15 or 38 or anything else. So I think those are the things that we look at when we see McNeese. And also too that the wins that they have, excuse me, aren't as really haven't moved the needle very much in terms of getting them all the way up to a hosting discussion where maybe some of the other metrics have them.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you on the McNeese, and I think they're a good team. Now, and again, I think some of those numbers in the other metrics will probably start to dip as they get into Southland Conference play, to something, unless they just go on a tear. And at that point, it's a whole different conversation. At that point, from that standpoint, but that one jumps out. I'll go another one. This is where obviously a very popular program, Oklahoma. You've got them at 7, while the other metrics have them at 14 and 11.
Yeah, so obviously, Oklahoma is sort of the premier program. And again, one of the things I'll point to about Oklahoma is their Pythagorean record, right? And some people can say, they had a recent win, I think, where they dropped 30 on somebody or some astronomical football score. So again, because of that, the point exchange is the same there because again, we said if you win by 8 or by 30, you get the same number of points. But we really the way that they are outscoring their opponents is suggests that they should it's the fourth best in the country. It's suggesting they should win almost 95% of their games. They're winning 92. But obviously the Southeastern Conference, the fact that they play in that conference really boosts their DSR as well, because again, we're contextualizing the games that they play within that conference. I think we have them higher. DSR has them higher than the others because I think of their strength of schedule. I think teams have really maybe shied away from playing Oklahoma. And so right now their strength of schedule is closer to in the 70s. And so I think that hurts them in RPI and KPI. But but the fact that they're 24-2, they play in the Southeastern Conference, they have a Pythagorean record that suggests they should win 95% of their games is what makes them a national seed for us right now.
Couple teams you ranked, your DSR has ranked higher than the other metrics, North Carolina and Ole Miss, which probably also will catch some eyes there. Talk about those two teams in particular. You've got them ranked a little higher than the other metrics. Now, one thing I've noticed too, like, even if I feel like I disagree with it, it's not like you're far off. Whereas some of the RPI numbers, for example, I completely disagree with, and I think it's way off base. That being said, I think some people might be surprised where you have Ole Miss, considering this weekend against Alabama was the first games that Ole Miss has played against a Power 4 opponent this year, which is a remarkable stat. But as you brought up, that goes back to the scheduling formula. So just kind of expand on that scheduling and the factors there, because I think that impacts Ole Miss and North Carolina, and the scoring margin certainly benefiting a North Carolina that has a great offense.
Yeah, we'll start with Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss benefits a lot from playing in the Southeastern Conference. And so it will be interesting as they begin, they started conference play with Alabama and had a rough go at it. But I think despite having not played a Power 4, their strength of schedule is still pretty good. And right now 18-8 is is tough. Is it, obviously they're pretty high up as far as team with 8 losses. To have them be at 14 is pretty high. But and so I think again, their if I look at their Pythagorean record, it's closer to a 644 team. And so I think that I think they're being really helped because DSR recognizes they're playing in, the premier conference in softball. And so I think that it's potentially a little bit kinder to them than maybe some of the other metrics go. And as far as North Carolina goes, I think this is really where the emphasis on strength of schedule jumps out. North Carolina, we've got them at a 109 strength of schedule, which is going to really hurt them in a system that puts two parts your opponents and one part yours. So I think that's but again, they've won 86% of their games. They're 19-3 in the ACC, which is a great conference. They're outscoring their opponents. The run differential is really good. It's a top 15 Pythagorean record. So I think again, for North Carolina, I think what hurts them is their strength of schedule within those others. But we're looking primarily at that 19-3 record and that run differential that suggests potentially a top 15 team. But again, that record and that Pythagorean record contextualized within that strength of schedule has them, at I think we have them at 27.
You mentioned conferences, the SEC and everything. That's always another popular topic about, hey, this conference is really the best in the sport. This conference is not as good. How do you evaluate conferences? Do you evaluate conferences?
Yeah, so we do evaluate conferences, and what we do is essentially we look at each conference's record against non-conference opponents. And so what we do is we take, for example, if we look at the Big Ten, right, we would take all the Big Ten teams who play non-conference, and we essentially make them into like a single team, right? So UCLA scores 10 runs, Oregon scores 8 runs, right? So we just add up all of the runs scored in non-conference play, and we add up all the runs allowed in non-conference play. And so we use that same Pythagorean record formula to then create a winning percentage. And so that's actually how we rank the conferences, is how you do against non-conference play. Again, we talked about potential tweaks. One of the things that I've been thinking about, right, is if the SEC goes and plays an ACC team, they get the same credit as if they go and play somebody from, the Northeastern Conference or the Horizon or the Summit. And that doesn't quite seem like an apples to apples comparison. And so, one of the things I've thought about, is there a better way for us to evaluate the strength of a conference that's played in? But that's how we do it.
No, that's very interesting there. I want to ask you, and this is a big topic in baseball, but it's softball as well. Winning a series versus winning individual games. Baseball, that is harped on a lot. But even some of the committee paper people I've talked to in softball are starting to look like, hey, if it's a resume, it's close. A team beat this team head 2 out of 3. That could be the difference. How do you evaluate that? A team, let's say, I'll give you an example. UCF goes on the road, wins a series at Oklahoma State. What's the value in that in a DSR versus, for example, I'll use a UCLA sweeping Wisconsin at home, or things like that.
Yeah, so DSR doesn't have any concept of a series, right? For DSR, it's a series. It's a group of. It's just every game is individual, right? And so the fact that you won 2 out of 3, the UCF won 2 out of 3 against Oklahoma State in a series, DSR doesn't treat that any differently than if you won 2 out of 3 of your midweek games versus 3 different opponents. There's no extra points or anything like that if you win the series. And what we the thought is, and there was some discussion early on about whether or not there should be some sort of bonus for winning a series. And what we wanted to avoid was putting too much emphasis on a small sample, right? Because 3 games, that's a pretty small sample, especially in the context of 50. And so if you're arbitrarily grouping three together, we don't really put that in context, or we don't really consider series wins so much. And so but again, what you could do, especially something like UCF, you go on the road, you take 2 out of 3, especially if those margins are big, and you maybe weren't favored in those games, there's a pretty decent chance you could get more DSR points for taking 2 out of 3 on the road than maybe a UCLA who swept a team that maybe they were big favorites against and they were close games. So it's certainly, but again, we view it as a series of individual games. There's no group of games that we really consider.
And I agree with that because the value is, hey, you got 2 wins over Oklahoma State on the road. That's your value.
Mhm. Yes.
But at the same time, if a road team takes a game on the road, there's some value there.
For sure.
So that's why it's just interesting how baseball and softball handle it, because I know in baseball it's all about winning the series and weekends. It's so fascinating. Where softball, it's not as much, and there's pluses and minuses to both of those. So I was curious from your perspective on that. So I really like that a lot. Couple more things before we let you go. What is something that has surprised you so far? Anything that jumped out to you as this season has gone on? Either some trends that you've noticed, or like things are like, boy, that's an interesting team, either positive or negative.
Yeah, I think the concentration of elite teams, like the difference between the haves, I'll call them, maybe not the haves and the have-nots, but the traditional powers have really seemed to separate themselves from everybody else. I mean, you've got so many teams, like, there's still 2 undefeated teams, and we're almost we're in the second week of March. Still, and again, these are not, I mean, Grand Canyon's undefeated, but you've got Tennessee and Alabama in the strongest conference, with who are undefeated. You've got Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma, with 2 losses. And so I think I've been surprised, and again, maybe this is my relative newness to softball. I've only really been paying attention to it for 3 years now, but it seems that the rich keep getting richer, so to speak, and so that has been really interesting to me, and I think, yeah, and I but I do like what has also been interesting to me is to watch these teams, as you mentioned earlier, go out and play in these tournaments, and sort of be able to expose different people, to be able to watch different teams in person. I think has been interesting for me.
The committee this year will seed 32 teams instead of 16. Big change. What was your reaction when you heard that? And I would imagine, and I feel like that helped you as well, and that's going to help, because now if I'm seeding 32, trust me, as somebody who's been over a decade has had to try to seed 16, that's not easy. Now you're asking me to seed 32. That's going to, sleep is definitely not going to be an option for me in the coming months. But I would imagine that also having more information to seed 30, because it's really close, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
people don't realize how tight it is from say 14 to 27, for example. It's very tight. So having more information, I would imagine the committee, that's another reason I think they want that DSR will be a part of the metrics that the committee can use.
Yeah, I think, I feel like that, the folks who sign up to be on the selection committee, I just give so much credit to, because it's an impossible job to do it, because everybody's going to criticize you, and nobody, it's kind of like being an umpire, right? Like, the best you can hope for is that nobody talks about you. And so I think that they have a really hard job. And so we're hopeful that this will give them another tool. And one of the things that that I also like about DSR is we give a raw value, and I think RPI may and KPI may do this too. But I would encourage people, if you're looking at the DSR rankings on the D1 softball site, don't just look at the rank, look at the actual raw value too, because when you do that, you see real tiers of teams, right? And I look, when I look right now, I'm looking at, the difference between, we have Washington at 26, and North Carolina at 27. They actually have the exact same DSR value, and we take it out to three places, so 0.582. And then you see South Carolina at 0.579 and then Kentucky at 0.577. But then the difference between Kentucky and Baylor is, a tenth, right? I go from 577 to 565. That's a big jump. That's way bigger than the difference between 26, 27, 28, and 29, right? And so you can start to see and so I think that's an interesting play. And so when, again, you're trying to seed 32 teams, having that level of granularity, I think, is really helpful. To say hey, this is a cluster of teams, then there's a drop, and then there's another cluster, and then there's a drop. And so I think, but I mean, right, as a data person, right, I love the idea of being able to reward, some of these top seeds, with an easier road to the tournament, right? Instead of looking at things like geography. And I understand that there's a practical and a financial element to that, certainly. But to the extent that we can, give those teams with great regular seasons an easier road, but at the same time still give everybody a chance. I'm all for seeding 32 teams. I feel like I give the committee a lot of credit. They've got a hard job that they just made harder. But I feel like that they're doing it for the benefit of the sport, and I love that.
Yeah, just to balance out the in theory, to balance out the regionals and not be such one-sided, which at times we've seen that throughout the kind of some of the brackets over the years and in the past. All right, that's Forrest Allen, 643. We're gonna have him on pretty frequently starting in April in small bits and probably in our Thursdays podcasts, where we're gonna go over the numbers and kind of get you set. Again, DSR now is a metric that the committee will use and can use as part of the selection process. If you go to d1softball.com, click on the rankings tab, you will see the DSR under Diamond Sports rankings. Every day it's updated, correct? Every day
Yeah.
it will be posted.
Yeah, it's the first thing I do when I get up in the morning. I make my coffee and I go in and I update the rankings. So, but yeah, it should be there. 9 o'clock Eastern time every morning.
Yeah, and we're going to have you on, and we'll talk about some teams, and maybe one of the things we'll pick up, for example, is some sleeper teams, because one of the things, too, is the DSR, you can find out with the rankings, maybe some mid-major teams or teams that get automatic bids that you don't know about that could be a team that could make some noise come May as well, which we'll discuss in future episodes, like, for example, Liberty last year. A lot of people maybe were caught off guard, maybe not so much if you were following DSR, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I look at some of the teams right now that are that maybe aren't the Stanford and the Oklahomas of the world, like a Grand Canyon, right? 27-0, we've got them as a top 25 team. Western Kentucky is squarely in that mix at 18-3, with really good run differentials. So USF, right? So some of these teams from non-power four schools that I think that stack up really well against some of the power four teams. But I'd love to get into that.
All right, so we'll be doing that come April and into May. So Forrest, whether you like it or not, we're gonna get to know each other a lot very, very well.
This has been super fun, so I look forward to it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's fun.